Okay, I can confirm that we have our YouTube live stream up and running. It's about a 1 minute delay. And so, not that I'm going to have a censor button, so please, everyone, keep it clean, but we should be all good to get going. Perfect. Well, we still have people coming in. It looks like we've got 25 attendees and counting. We've got 90 minutes together today. And so I do expect we'll see more people come in as the session rolls onwards. It's an action-packed session. We have 3 segments for everyone today. And I'd just like to start with 2 things. First is a land acknowledgement. Especially in the last couple of weeks. I think it's important that we remember that the city we hope to transform sits on unceded Anishinaabe territory and the banks of the Kitchissippi, and that's long been a meeting place for Indigenous peoples. When we speak about Ottawa as a modern city, we center our colonial understanding of the place we live in. And so as we continue to be reminded of the genocide that has shaped our nation, it's essential that we find ways to continue to make Synapsity's work and all of your work, the work of reconciliation and decolonization as well. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us here. Any attendees who'd like to, please introduce yourselves in the chat. But I am just going to go ahead and introduce our host for the session today, and that is Ken Victor, one of Synapsity's co-founders, one of Synapsity's board members, all around great gentleman, and he'll take it away for everyone else. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you for that moving acknowledgement. It's good to have everyone here. Our purpose today is to collectively get smarter about community benefit agreements and what they could mean for Ottawa. CBAs are actually a large topic. We can't possibly cover everything, so we will be putting some things into chat for folks who want to learn more. We know our audience today is a mix of people. Some folks are passionate about CBAs and very knowledgeable, and there are other folks who are going, what's a CBA? So just to start off, for that latter group, I just want to put a starting point out in our conversation of a definition of what a CBA is. A CBA is a tool to ensure that infrastructure and building projects provide local benefits, such as jobs, training, and neighborhood improvements through agreements that are entered into by community groups, governments, and developers. I wanted to put that out as a placeholder just because we're going to spend most of our time today on the how, who, and why of CBAs. In terms of the session's flow, while Synapsity's focus is always on civic literacy that's relevant to Ottawa, it's important with CBAs to put our learning conversation in the larger context of other cities in Canada, which have fundamentally more experience than Ottawa with CBAs. So we have guests from Vancouver and Toronto who graciously agreed to be part of our conversation. We will talk with Toronto and Vancouver for 45 minutes. After that, we'll be joined by Steve Willis. Steve is the general manager in Ottawa for planning, infrastructure, and economic development. Steve has another commitment, so we'll just have Steve for a brief period of time, but we really wanted to welcome him into the conversation. And so we'll be with Steve after we talk with Vancouver and Toronto. After Steve, we'll be joined with 5 members of the Ottawa Community Benefits Network: Martin Adelar, Mary Wong, Michael Muir, Adam Melnick, and George Brown. This is going to be a very full 90 minutes. So we do encourage you to put questions to us. It's unlikely we get to all of them. In fact, we'll probably get to a very few of them. But one of our commitments is to try to answer some of the questions in our newsletter that will come out post this webinar. So, and the other thing that we'll use the questions for is to look at, should there be another learning event around CBAs. With that said, let me introduce our guests from Vancouver and Toronto. From Vancouver, we're joined by Alicia Massensong. She's a social planner in community economic development at the City of Vancouver, where part of her portfolio focuses on implementing the city's community benefit agreement policy. Prior to working for the city, Alicia was the acting director at Exchange Inner City, a community membership-based organization that implements community economic development projects in Vancouver's downtown east side. Alicia also worked as the manager of community engagement at Bisocial Canada. It was through her work at Exchange Inner City in Bisocial Canada that she first came to learn about community benefits agreements and was involved in advocating for and supporting the development of the city's CBA policy. We're also joined from Vancouver by David LePage, who's the managing partner of Bisocial Canada. David serves on the board of the Social Enterprise World Forum and is chair of the Social Enterprise Council of Canada. He's the author of the book Marketplace Revolution: From Concentrated Wealth to Community Capital. Just so you know a little bit about Bisocial, Bisocial Canada's mission is to leverage the social value of purchasing power. As part of that mission, Bisocial Canada works with developers, governments, and communities to shape their procurement policies and practices, including the design of CBAs. The City of Vancouver's CBA policy and its compliance toolkit was developed in partnership with Bisocial Canada. They are currently working with the cities of Peterborough, Fort McMurray, Calgary, among others, and with private sector partners SAP and Chandos Construction. Joining us from Toronto, April Lim is a policy development officer at the City of Toronto. In the last few years, April's work has focused on advancing community benefits at the City of Toronto. In 2018, she was at the front lines of establishing the Rexdale Casino Woodbine Community Benefits Agreement. And in 2019, she led the development of the City of Toronto's Community Benefits Framework. Kumsa Baker is the Director of Campaigns at the Toronto Community Benefits Network. The Toronto Community Benefits Network is a 120-member and growing coalition of community organizations, grassroots groups, and social enterprises, unions, construction, trades, training centers, and workforce development agencies. Thank you to the four of you for joining us and helping us in Ottawa benefit from your experience and history with CBAs. I want to start, we'll probably start west and move east. I want to start west in Vancouver. And let's start at the beginning. And I want to tee up a question, David, for you. When we talk about community benefits, is there a success story you can point to so we have a sense of, so what, when we talk about community benefits, what are the community benefits we're talking about? Is there an example that could give us a sense of what that is?
Well, I think, Ken, I think we got to look at what we're trying to achieve. And if we're trying to achieve community development, CBAs become a tool. And so we have to look at them as instances as achievement. So if we think about Vancouver, we have to go back, like 15 years at least, to when the Vancouver Winter Olympics were being designed. And that was the first time that the community stepped up and said, if you're going to be doing all this development, we've seen in previous event things and big projects, that there can actually be the exclusion of the inner city community. There can be, actually displacement. There can be problems. So I think one of the big things about a community benefit agreement is how community can mobilize to come together, to identify what's needed and to create a position that can work with other parts. And I think in Vancouver, what we've seen is that community effort, which I think is really critical. We've seen the use of events like the Olympics, and then we saw another event where a casino was moving into right downtown. And the community again got together and said, wait a minute, we don't need a casino. The city said we need tourism and development. So it was really a negotiated kind of settlement of what benefits in terms of, as you pointed out, in terms of employment, local purchasing, and could be created. So I think one of the big steps we've taken is the fact that we look at community benefit agreements not just as an event, but as more of an ongoing process. So the going from the Olympics, which was an event kind of thing, to the casino, which is jobs and local procurement and local jobs through the life of the casino. Then in 2018, actually working with the City of Vancouver government to put in a permanent policy that affected large rezoning projects. So I think we have to look at CBAs as a progression of how we utilize infrastructure and construction to build community, and not just events. I think if we look at CBAs as events, we lose the real potential of the change management, the community development aspect of it. But I know we negotiate them as events, but they're really part of, I think, a much larger community development initiative.
Thank you, David. I want to go, or let's go to Toronto. And Kumsa, I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of, is there a particular, and I'm conscious of not wanting to say it's an event, David, is there a particular community benefit that you would point to as giving us a sense of what are the kinds of benefits that emerged from a particular agreement in Toronto?
Thank you, Ken. It's great to join you all this afternoon. In terms of your question, as it relates to community benefit agreements, I would probably point to the City of Toronto's first ever community benefits agreement, which was part of the Rexdale Casino Woodbine Casino expansion, which happened in 2018. And as part of that agreement, we heard a lot through community engagement. TCBN did an extensive community engagement and consultation process to really identify, what were those type of benefits that the people in the community really want to see from this $1 billion investment in their community. And at the forefront, I think at the core was the focus around good jobs. People, really wanted to ensure that, with this economic investment, that there were good jobs being created in their community. So there was commitments to local hiring. So within a certain radius of the site, there would be an opportunity to work with local workforce development agencies and community organizations to really work with their clients and local community members who may be interested in career opportunities. And that ranges from the construction side of things and in actually building out the development to the operations and the long-term career opportunities at all levels of that operation. There was also a focus around procurement, supporting local businesses. And so there was a 10% target set for procurement of local businesses and diverse owned suppliers within the area. It's also, the city also looks at it with a sort of a radius close to the site. And then also other neighborhood improvements, which was also, something that emerged from our consultation process. People saw that there was going to be an investment of a 3,500 seat performance theater and facility. And we heard from a lot of arts groups, and cultural groups who said that, it would be great to have access, at free or no cost, to, host arts events and cultural events and that sort of stuff. And so from that, a community use of space policy was developed with the City of Toronto. And the other big neighborhood improvement, I would say, was the childcare center. A lot of discussion around employment and opportunities and good jobs. But one of the big barriers that were identified through the consultation process was childcare as being one barrier for people, and the lack of access within the community to really affordable childcare spaces. And so as part of the community benefits agreement, there was a $5 million commitment from the developer to the City of Toronto to build a new childcare facility.
Thank you, Kum. So that really gives us a sense of the kinds of benefits that can emerge from an agreement. I am curious hearing this, and I'll go back to Vancouver. And Alicia, what if you could tee this up for us? One of the things that I wonder if you could give us a 30,000-foot understanding of how does an agreement actually happen? How do the various stakeholders actually align around benefits? And I imagine that's a marathon and not a sprint, but I'm curious if there's some sense that you could provide about how that happens.
Yeah, for sure. So, because Vancouver has a CBA policy, this means that we have set targets and a way of going about putting these agreements in place. So when large development projects that have a total floor area of over 45,000 square meters, or that would be about 485,000 square feet, come through our rezoning application process, it is required that if they are of that size, that they are mandated to go through our community benefit agreement policy. So doing that allows them to be approved for rezoning. So that's sort of the first place here in Vancouver, because of that policy being there. That is how the agreement is set in place and where it begins. There is also the opportunity for projects that maybe don't meet that threshold size, so that are smaller than that, they can voluntarily opt into an agreement. And often we see organizations who are really trying to get ahead of the curve. So developers and general contractors who have this as part of their mission to make a social impact in their communities, and are looking at social procurement and what they do all the time, will usually do that opt-in process. And so when we look at those types of agreements, it's really about mission driven, and also about even our own sort of development projects in the city of Vancouver. When we're looking at redeveloping community centers or different centers in Vancouver that's owned by the city of Vancouver or other levels of government, we're often encouraging and ensuring that we're applying our own community benefit agreement policy in those agreements too. But really, to get down into the details of like how that agreement gets set. So once we have this policy template, that template is provided to developers during the rezoning application process, and it has the set targets in place, which are 10% first source hiring, which is looking to create job opportunities for folks who are local and who are considered equity seeking groups in the community throughout both the construction and the operations phases of the development projects. And then the other target that is set in that template that we provide developers is a minimum 10% social value spend towards materials, goods, and services in both construction and operations. So those targets are there in place, and those are the main agreements that we're having developers agree to. And we work through negotiating some of the finer details during that rezoning application process, such as looking at whether that the developer would need to participate in our citywide community benefit agreement working group, or looking at how long into the operations phase we would monitor these agreements. For the most part, we have a minimum of 5 years into operations phase that we monitor them, but we could look to having that longer, negotiating that. And then also that negotiation really happens in the implementation as well. So as we're working through with developers, we have a resource and support available to them through our project-specific working group committees, where the developer will have to hire a third-party monitor, and we work with the developer, the general contractor, the third-party monitor, and then bring in community folks as needed, depending on where things are at in the development project phase. But it's through those meetings and those conversations where we start to get information about how is this development project projecting to meet those 10% first source hiring targets for employment, and meeting those 10% social and local procurement targets, and getting those projected numbers. And we see if there's any gaps or challenges in meeting those community benefit agreements set in place. And that's where we can negotiate some changes. So if they're having a tough time meeting some of the employment pieces through that working group, we would encourage looking at training and supporting, providing monetary support to develop a training, or support an organization to get in a training program to get more of those trades folks, let's say, that they're having shortages finding for the construction jobs. So there is an opportunity there for those agreements to be negotiated a little bit more and to have some flexibility, so that it's still creating a long-lasting opportunity in the community. And now we have this training program that can run long-term and continue to get folks into the workforce development and into the employment sector, and support meeting some of those future CBA demands as well as that current project. So it does, there's this whole process. I'm not even going into more of the detail. Like, of course, once you get through the rezoning process and that agreement's been signed, and then they move in through our development permit process, and they have to meet certain targets by then, which normally what we require the developer to do is to hire their third-party monitor, start that project-specific working group with us and the community and their third-party monitor. And then as we move through the phases of the development project, constantly monitoring that minimum requirement is being met, and that we're working through those agreements.
Thanks, Alicia. April, can I ask you to give us a Toronto perspective? And I know you have a CBA policy, which is different than a CBA framework, but I'm wondering within your CBA framework, how does an agreement actually, from the 30,000 foot level, how does that agreement come in place?
So you're absolutely right, Ken. At the City of Toronto, we do have a community benefits framework approach. And what that means is that there's an umbrella framework that can provide community benefits related support and guidance to a range of different city programs, policies, initiatives that would like to leverage and incorporate community benefits into their program. So each of the different city policies or programs or initiatives are slightly different. And so the agreement where we're going to secure community benefits clauses into city contracts are slightly different. So for example, in the City of Toronto's social procurement policy and program, community benefits clauses are secured into procurement contracts between the City of Toronto and its vendors. That can include developers, contractors, professional services, etc. Whereas with the Housing Now initiative, for example, community benefits clauses are secured through lease agreements between the City of Toronto and developers who the city is working with to build out its affordable housing portfolio. So the agreement that the City of Toronto uses to secure community benefits clauses is slightly different depending on what the city authority or the lever is, whether it's procurement or a lease agreement or a financial incentive, etc. The key difference between like what Alicia was talking about with their CBA policy, I mean, there's many differences, but one that I'd highlight is that in Vancouver, their CBA policy applies to private development that are going through zoning or rezoning application. Whereas in the City of Toronto, our community benefits focuses on leveraging city-funded public projects, not private development on privately owned land that is going through rezoning. And that's a reflection of the different planning legislation that differs by province. Whereas in the Ontario Planning Act, leveraging community benefits type of clauses through zoning processes is not the same as what is enabled through British Columbia's planning legislation.
Thank you, April. Thanks both. It's helpful to hear the difference. I want to go to, and I think Kumsa, maybe I'll start with you. One of the things that occurs to me is that it's easy to think that an agreement is only as good as the enforcement possibilities within the agreement. And so I'm wondering, how does enforcement or monitoring happen? What's the way that evolves?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And in our experience here in Toronto, working on, various different projects of different scales, one of the really important things that we've seen is, there has to be as much effort put into the agreement, into the monitoring and evaluation of the agreement as well. Like, the work, does not stop once the agreement is signed. It rather just sort of kickstarts a new process. And that is a process and that, we've seen to be very important in terms of establishing a working group. I think here in Toronto, I think all of our projects have some type of working group that's kind of overseeing the implementation of these agreements. And one of the core elements that we, always advocate for is to make sure that there is a community seat at that table to monitor and evaluate that. Because a lot of times, like April has mentioned, these agreements are between the city and developer. And so, the city is trying their best to, really secure those benefits. But how do we make sure that both the city and the developer are being held accountable to those commitments? And so, really pushing for transparency, really pushing for reporting. Usually we ask for quarterly reports on outcomes from these CBAs to be made publicly available. And that way, through transparency, the public is able to hold both the developer and the city accountable. And through these working groups, really understanding that we may not get everything perfect, right? There are a lot of issues that come back to these working groups that need to be addressed. But by working collaboratively and by, identifying, solutions to some of these challenges, is really important. So having quarterly meetings of the working group to really, work through some of those challenges to make sure that the commitments that were made upfront are actually realized and can be surpassed by the end of the project.
Thanks, Kumsa. David, I was aware when Alicia was talking about how an agreement happens, she was talking about a third-party monitor and possibility of 5 years of monitoring. And I was hearing monitoring rather than enforcement. And enforcement has this notion of power and punishment behind it. And I'm curious if the Vancouver's way of enforcing CBAs it has a different flavor to it. Is there something in there to look at? I'd be curious to hear the perspective of Vancouver in CBA monitoring and enforcement.
And I'm going to take off on Kumsa's conversation and discussion of collaboration, right? And where is that line of collaboration and collaboratively working together to get the right outcomes and accountability to actually getting things done? I remember when I was working with the city of Vancouver to help with the casino CBA, and the casino developer from Las Vegas said, "Don't worry, we're really a nice company. We'll do good things for the community anyway." And they said, "David, do you think that's okay to take their word on it?" And I said, "Well, would you allow the fox to guard the hen house and report how things are going? Or would you want to put something that's stricter in there?" So it's a combination of having to have some reporting, like Kumsa is talking about, quarterly or something, targets. But when we say monitor, we really try to use that not just as enforcement, because they have in Vancouver, they have their occupancy permit, their development permit is dependent upon, sticking with their agreement. So the city has a huge lever to keep it enforced, but the enforcement is not necessarily our objective as much as the creation of the jobs in the local procurement. So there's that combination of wanting to create, and I think Coombs is absolutely correct, wanting to create that collaborative effort between the developer, owner, government, and community. Because if we think about these as tools, not just as rules, then I think we can move forward. But there's no doubt, and there's just some research that came out from New Zealand and Australia last week, without the government requirements, it's not going to happen. Without industry wanting to do it and learning to want to do it, it's not going to happen. So we're at an interesting point where the policy requirements are really important right now, because we're not at a point where the construction industry voluntarily, we have some voluntary, like we were working with Shandos Construction on a voluntary CBA on a social housing project, but that's not where the construction industry is right now. So we're in that phase where I think we do need some government leadership to say, you're going to do this and here's how it's going to be implemented. We need community to step up and say, we're going to support you in getting this done well.
I want to stay with this a little bit more. Obviously CBAs are written for community benefits to the community. Is there any lens that developers and infrastructure companies can look through where they actually do see benefits to them? Is there anything like that that's emerging? And with your work with Chandos Construction, I'm just curious, David, if that's a reasonable possibility.
So there's a number of possibilities and great benefits for industry. I mean, the construction industry is really, really short of skilled workers right now. Hundreds of thousands of positions are open. They're looking for skilled workers. If we can work with community and get young people to see the value and the benefits and provide a supportive path like TCBN does and some of the employment service providers across the country do, to get that path that supports the needs of the construction sector skilled trades, that's a huge benefit for the trades. When we look at social enterprises like Embers in Vancouver, building up in Toronto and others across the country, being able to provide a social enterprise or a small business or an Indigenous owned business services to a company that's looking to meet their social requirements, that's really a benefit for everybody. And I think business is realizing that their success in bidding, like April said, if it's a requirement, people want to bid. And if the question says, what do you do around social value? And you're going to come in on price, you're going to come in on quality. And your history of being more engaged in community gives you an edge on your next contract. That's where we're going to see it happen. And we're already seeing that in our work in Calgary, where we've monitored enough bids and enough social value questionnaires to see businesses starting to recognize that, oh, if that's a question and that's a value, I'm going to figure out how to do it. So it was only like 3 weeks ago, a major construction company called us and said, we saw that this is becoming a requirement. How do we learn more about it? So that incentive is really, really important. And this is why I think it's so important that we do this collaboratively. And I know there was a question about conflicting interests. And I think that's always going to be a problem, right? People are going to want more, people are going to want less, but somehow we have to, I think at this point in the evolution of CBAs, be quite open to construction industries trying to learn. They didn't come into this 4 years ago supportive. They've moved a long way to being much more collaborative than they were 4 or 5 years ago when we started these discussions. Community is learning how to play a good role. And I think government's learning how to play that. You know, we're a policy platform that can help support this.
Thank you, David. I want to bounce this back over to Kumsa and just get a Toronto perspective on this. On some level, you could say as a developer and infrastructure company, CBAs could be so much red tape and regulation. And I'm wondering if there is a lens that you see at all emerging in Toronto where there's some benefits that get experienced by developers and construction companies. Where does that play out for you right now in Toronto?
Yeah, I think like for us, like, you know, one of the lens that we've, you know, really been looking at this is through, you know, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, you know, you can go out, out to, you know, any construction site here in the city of Toronto. And, you know, a lot of those projects are not reflective of the diversity of the communities in which these projects are working in. And, you know, David alluded to, you know, the shortage of workers in the industry. You know, how can we really use this opportunity here in Toronto to really make sure that, you know, we're preparing the next generation of builders who are, you know, young Black, you know, men, or who are, you know, women who are interested in getting into the industry, you know, and working with some of our, you know, Indigenous groups and network members to, you know, to get more representation, you know, within the industry, you know. And we've looked at the stats, you know, it's very appalling, you know, in terms of the diversity of this industry. And, you know, and the other thing too is like, we know that this industry are really great jobs. You know, these are good careers with pension, with benefits, and these are the type of jobs that our community has been asking for. And, you know, that's one of the key, really the things that, you know, we've been trying to work with, you know, some of these developers here in Toronto, who want to, make some of these changes within their companies, who want to, take more of a leadership in wanting to represent the community and having a workforce, across from, the bottom all the way to management level that is reflective of the community of here in Toronto. And so that's, one of the big lenses that, we're really trying to work with industry. Just in May, we hosted a huge gala called the Building Diversity Awards, where we acknowledged and recognized, some of the leaders in the industry, whether they're developers, unions, contracting authorities who are leading on equity, diversity, and inclusion within the industry, and who are taking steps not only to diversify the workforce, but also to make sure that, these workplaces are also, free from any discrimination, racism, or harassment. Just last year here in Toronto, we had incidents of 5 different construction sites where there were nooses with Black workers. And so we are seeing, on the front lines in these workplaces that as we, push for more community benefits, as more, diversity comes to the workplaces, that there is resistance and that there are these issues that are coming in up. And so that's why, we're really seeing the importance to really, double down and really increase our efforts to really, capture this really opportunity. Lots of public money is going into infrastructure, from the federal level, from the provincial level, from the municipal level, especially with the recovery, lots of investments coming in. This is public money, and we need to leverage this public money for the best public benefits, and also making sure that we're building back differently and with equity, diversity, and inclusion at the core.
Thanks, Kumsa. There's one more question I want to ask. I want to ask you about each of you, what would be the core lesson learned that you would share with us in Ottawa. Before I do that, I just want to ask a big question of April and Alicia and see if you can give me the 30,000 viewpoint of this. What would you tell us about the journey that your cities have been on to get to a place where you could align stakeholders so that a framework could even emerge for the city, or that a policy could be emerged? What was that journey like? April, can you give us some flavor of that?
Sure. I think that we would need probably another hour to really dive into the City of Toronto's long journey of how we've gotten to where we are here today. But I think that one of the things that really stands out is the City of Toronto very quickly moved from looking at community benefits, as David puts it, as like a longer term opportunity, as processes that evolve, and not necessarily events, but community benefits opportunities make a lot of sense. And across different stakeholder groups, it was pretty easy to agree, where there is public investment opportunity and public dollars, we should create inclusive economic development opportunities for the communities in our city that need them the most. But then shifting from that into the how do you actually make that happen? How do you actually create contracts that can be strongly enforced and monitored over time? How do you create hiring pathways that link these communities that you're targeting with the employment opportunities? And how do you validate and track that progress over time in a consistent, reliable, and evidence-based way? So that's where we're currently grappling with all of the how questions. And one thing that we have acknowledged very early on is that this is very much a systems approach. The City of Toronto cannot do this work alone, and that there's a wide range of stakeholders that must come together, in first and foremost community, but in addition to community, labor, unions, developers, contractor associations, and then, because we're not only focusing on construction jobs, other professional services, training programs, and in the nonprofit sector, employment service providers. Community benefits brings all of these stakeholders who may otherwise not have been convened at one table together to work together and to problem solve on some very sticky, complex challenges. These are ones where the different stakeholders at the table have mutually beneficial outcomes, but also competing interests. So for that reason, we've tried to create space where that collaboration and co-design and problem solving can work. We created our community benefits advisory group that has over 50 plus members that meets quarterly. We are also creating 4 additional ad hoc working groups that are launching later this year, where a deeper dive into that problem solving can happen. We also have community steering committees to oversee existing community benefits initiatives. And anytime there is the development or creation of a new policy or program, or the opportunity to review and iterate, community partners are always brought in, other stakeholders also. So it's very much a systems approach journey where everyone just really needs to work together.
Thank you. I wish we did have the 2 hours to hear the whole story. Alicia, can you give us a sense of how you would characterize the journey in Vancouver?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, very similar to an extent as to what April said, in that it requires a lot of folks, a lot of meetings, working with community and having that collaborative aspect and convening people together. But it also goes back to what David was saying earlier too, that really a lot of this started as a tool to look at how we create social impact in the community back in about 2005 with the starting to look at the Olympic Village and the Hastings Racecourse development, the Olympic Village development. So some of those earlier developments where we started to learn about CBAs in the community and the community actually really advocating to government for this to happen. So I would say, it started there, the learning started there, and there was a buildup of members like David and others in community who pushed for this at the City of Vancouver ongoing. And in 2014, a downtown east side neighborhood plan was developed. And in that plan, a lot of these folks who were maybe part of advocating for CBAs or involved in some of those models that occurred with Hastings Racecourse and Olympic Village development, noticed that there was something lacking in the downtown east side neighborhood plan, and that was a community economic development strategy. And so from there, community pushed city government again and said, we need this community economic development plan in the downtown east side. And that allowed the city to secure funding and to create a community-based committee at the time, which was called Community Economic Development Strategic Action Committee, CEDSAC for short, but that eventually evolved into what is now Exchange Intercity. And that was a committee of about 35 plus stakeholders of nonprofit, people from nonprofits, social enterprises, local residents, Indigenous groups coming together to create a downtown east side community economic development strategy. So that got approved in 2016. And in that strategy, one of the key recommendations was that the city create its own community benefit agreement policy. So take the learnings from these previous projects and make actual policy, and let's make sure that this starts to apply to any large scale development project going forward. And so again, it was through the folks around Exchange Intercity table that initially started the CED strategy that advocacy and community continued with the city. And between the city collaborating with community, we hosted different educational events with community to share about the capacity of social enterprises to meet community benefit agreements. We followed, at the City of Vancouver, obviously monitoring and following and piloting it on the Park Vancouver Casino project. We took the learnings and did learning events with community in collaboration to hear where were the challenges and learnings coming out of that project. And what did we need to think about, from that and adding it into what the city's eventual policy would be. And that ended up.
I'm going to interrupt just in the interest of time, because we've got to switch to welcoming Steve Willis. So I wanted to end with, I'm going to sort of do a turn, and I'm going to ask, and I'm going to give each of you only 1 minute for this. So if you were to take one lesson that you've learned that you would want to share with Ottawa? And when I say Ottawa, you could break it down to this is for the Ottawa Community Benefits Network, or for developers, or for city staff, or elected officials, whatever. What's the one lesson in 1 minute that you would offer to us in Ottawa? And I'll just go around from how it looks in my screen. So I'll go David, Kumsa, April, and then Alicia. In 1 minute.
I'll give Kumsa my extra 30 seconds. Construction is about building community, not merely a physical structure.
Wonderful, thank you. Kumsa.
Yeah, I definitely echo David's points. It has to, it's not just about the physical side. It is the, also the social infrastructure, the environmental, supports and sustainability that lens that needs to be there as well. I would say here in Toronto, I would say, definitely making sure that there's a strong grounding of this work in community. Here in Toronto, we're great to have a really strong community labor coalition, that, continues to grow and evolve, as a network. But at our core, is that, community labor foundation, which has been really successful in us being able to accomplish what we have. And then, I'd also suggest, don't wait for government to lead. Here in Toronto, we've thought big. And we've also, put ourselves in a position to not wait for policy or for government to lead, rather for community to lead and really push our government, really push the private sector and the industry to really adopt community benefits agreements and to really have the tools available to really make this work. And so continue to make sure that, that this work is being led by community and that, you're pushing government and private sector to really get to where you need to be.
Thanks, Kumsa. April.
I think that I would maybe just go the very practical route to in terms of advice to our Ottawa friends, and that is to do two things, or keep in mind two things. And the first is to have a really clear sense about how your contract is going to be. I know we don't like this word, but enforced over time. Because like David said earlier, the elements that get included into any type of a community benefits agreement, whether it's public sector or public sector, over time, there's going to need to be oversight on compliance of whatever's in that contract. So when the going gets tough, if the going gets tough, how is that contract going to be enforced is a really key piece to think about. On what authority, on what lever. And the other one is, I would say it's never too early to think about the how questions and how you're actually going to implement the different community benefits goals or ambitions or targets that you are going to put into place. It's never too early to think about what those hiring pathways or social procurement pathways are going to look like. It's never too early to do a little bit of baseline setting to understand what is the current picture of available labor or demographics in the community, or those different pieces.
Thanks, April. And Alicia.
Yeah, for sure. So I have two lessons, and I think this more so applies to folks who work in city government. But the first is, and really this is a lesson, education in general. So education across all levels of stakeholders, education within your own city government departments and colleagues, but then with the community, with the development industry, with the construction industry, education is so key. So that everybody can get on board and to really make time for that and put resources behind that. But at a city government level, I would say it's really important to make time and to regularly and often do education sessions within your own internal staff departments on what is a community benefit agreement. Does everybody truly understand what it is, and then their role in the different processes of it being implemented, because it does require a number of city departments to really make this work and be successful. Our rezoning planners need to be on board, and they need to understand, and they need to know that this is applied during the rezoning application process and can follow up with developers on it. Our development permit folks need to know how to apply this, what's needed. and need to know where there's potential challenges and how to deal with that. So there's just a lot of education is required internally with city departments. And then the other thing that we've really learned at the City of Vancouver is if you're going to have a threshold if you're going to develop a policy and you're going to have a threshold size on how this policy is applied, making sure that size threshold it means the accumulated size of a development project, that if over time the project comes back and makes amendments to its original rezoning applications to add more floor area, that as that floor area accumulates over time, the policy should kick in. It shouldn't just kick in on the floor area that they suggested in the initial application. So making sure that your policy states that accumulated floor area over time requires that if it's over 45,000 square meters of cumulative floor space, then the CBA policy is kicking in, whether you've initially applied for that or came back a couple years later and applied to add more space.
Thanks, Alicia. I want to thank the four of you for helping us learn here in Ottawa. It's so appreciated that you made the time for us. Thank you. I also want to encourage you, by the way, there will be questions that are emerging. And if you folks feel like you want to chat about some of the questions and offer answers to some of the questions that appear in chat, please do as we switch to talking with Steve Willis. So thank you. I want to check to see if Steve is here. And are we ready for that conversation?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
I think you have to turn on the video at your end.
Nick, can you do that? Well, there you are. Hi,
Yeah.
Steve. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Just in the way of transparency, I want to let the audience know Steve is a former board member of Synapse City. Okay, Steve, so I'm just curious. I want to start with just a general sense. Based on what you've heard in the past 45 minutes, what strikes you as most important and relevant for us in Ottawa?
Well, first of all, I thank everyone coming in from Toronto and Vancouver. It was really instructive to listen to some of their experiences. And I know that we are talking regularly with Toronto because we operate in the same legal environment in Ontario. But the Vancouver experience is different, and it is interesting to see it. I break this down into three buckets in Ottawa, in our world. There's sort of what happens in the private development world. There's what happens in the public projects world, where the city is the behind the project, and then there's the other public projects that happen in Ottawa where it's not the city. And we have all three big areas, and there are big opportunities to do a lot in this space in the next little while. And we are in the city of Ottawa looking at this on a number of different levels.
The one I'm wondering if we could speak to is the one where we have more control, so to speak, which is those public projects that are city-based. How would you characterize where we are with that in terms of community benefits? Well, go ahead.
So we don't have a formal community benefits process yet, but our procurement division, which is a different department than ours is, that's in Innovative Client Services, is doing a project right now, and we'll be reporting to council in the next year on how we can, they call it a social procurement process, but it's how the city of Ottawa could build in some additional requirements for community benefits in the procurement of major projects. And, areas that we know that we can make easy, quick win gains is issues of local employment and local training, particularly with groups who traditionally not participate in the construction industry. And we, in discussions we've had with the Ottawa Construction Association and Algonquin College, who's been doing a bridge building exercise for a lot of this discussion, and La Cité Collégiale as well. Everybody's very interested because Ottawa has a trade shortage that's actually going to become a bigger and bigger problem. So we have a problem that could be solved if we did more engagement with people who've traditionally not been in the construction trades in Ottawa and bring them in, which would create a lot of community benefits. So we see that as a quick win area where we could probably have some real progress in a very short period of time.
That's great. Are there, Steve, I'm curious in general, what's your perspective on the role that CBAs could play in the city? It sounds like there's some clearly some quick wins that you can see in certain places. I'm wondering if you step back from that and you go, so what is the opportunity what's your take on how they could be of service? or not?
You know, I think my colleagues in the other cities did discuss it well. I mean, a lot of it depends on the project and what we're talking about. You know, if it's a city project, for example, in the library, we're not signing a CBA agreement, but we are looking at community benefits as part of that project, highly focused to Indigenous communities initially, but we are looking at, for example, of how some of the services inside the building could be provided through some sort of social procurement program. Other projects that are more, you know, in a new generation of a next LRT, perhaps there would be other opportunities to do this. And certainly as we change our procurement rules about making these requirements, more could happen in those public projects. The bigger the project, the easier it is to see it happening. You know, we're always competing for capital dollars to spend on this area and that. So it's always a bit of a, what is the impact on the budget? That's what we always have to answer to council. But as I said, some of these things need not necessarily add to the capital costs. It's more about setting some standards out there that we want people to do when they put bids in to do our work. On the private development side, it's a lot more complicated in Ontario, and April did a good job setting the stage in that we're incredibly regulated and don't have the powers that Vancouver has. I'm deeply envious of what Vancouver can do and we cannot do in Ontario. And we're going to confuse everybody in the next year because we're going to be starting a project called the Community Benefits Bylaw, which has nothing to do with this community benefits discussion. It's what Ontario, province of Ontario, has called community benefits, which is really a soft development charge process where it's very prescriptive. It only applies to buildings that are 10 units and 5 stories or more. It doesn't apply to low-rise infill, which is what we're trying to promote a lot of in Ottawa. It has a very strict limits on what the dollar value can be. It can only be up to 4% of the pre-development property value, and it's really just a cash payment. It's not any of the other community benefits we've talked about here. So I apologize to everybody in advance who are really putting effort into community benefits. We have to use that language that the province has given us, but it's not what we're talking about today. It will, and we are very constrained in Ontario. We do not have the ability to do it, and we're working very closely with Toronto and Hamilton, and Ottawa, Toronto, Hamilton are trying to bring a very similar strategy forward on that new community benefits bylaw, which is really, call it soft development charges if you want to do that, just to distinguish it from what we're talking about today.
Thanks, and I know you've got just a few minutes left. I want to ask you one other question. When participants come, when citizens come to take Synapcity's boot camp, one of the things we always work with them on their initiatives and their interests, we tell them, go look at the official plan and see where it connects with the official plan. And I know there's a new official plan that's we can all go online and look at it. I'm wondering how you see how community benefit agreements, do they align with the official plan? Does the official plan make room for that? What's your take on where that is headed right now?
I think there's lots of hints in the official plan about things we would like to achieve that feed well into the discussion of community benefits, but it really does not interplay because there are other provincial laws under the Planning Act that really apply, because the official plan guides what's the built form that gets built on the site and what's the regulation of land use, and kind of some guiding principles for our own capital investment projects that are more physical in nature. So I don't think we close the door, but I also don't think it does not preclude it. So it could actually happen. And we've been doing work with the Community Benefits Coalition. I know that we've had conversations about prioritizing projects, for example. I know there's representatives of the NCC on here, but what we'd like to see in terms of community benefits when planning advances in LeBreton Flats. We've worked with many people on the call here today about that. That will be a report to council soon. And so when we see a large redevelopment area, especially if it's a public agency, it's probably easier to do that because it's not quite really, it's a different dynamic than if we're dealing a small developer on a single site, for example.
Any last thing you want to share, Steve, before I let you go?
Well, I think the city is very interested in opportunities to engage, particularly in employment and training. I think in terms of local procurement from local sourcing of materials, that's much more complicated because there are actually international trade agreements that prevent us from actually going too far on that. And you can't do anything that would constrain competition. So you can't say you have to use a specific supplier or we break rules on procurement on that. But I think you'll see an evolution in the city because we'd like to see we'd like to see more impact of our own capital spending, particularly in again, getting some of the more traditionally non-participating communities involved in the actual, economic benefits of the projects through how we procure. So I see that coming, and I think it's only a matter of time. And I think we've got some good lessons that we've learned from our colleagues in the other cities.
Great. Steve, thanks for showing up. I know you've got a commitment at 1. It was great to have you on and for you to squeeze us into your schedule. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, and nice seeing everybody virtually. It's I look forward to the day when we can actually all get in the same space again. So it's coming soon, I hope. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, take care. We are going to switch. I think, by the way, Nick, that there are a number of links you're putting in the chat as we go. We're now going to be joined by 5 folks from the Ottawa Community Benefits Network. So I want to make sure they're able to join in. And so, it's going to be Martin Adelar, Mary Huang, Michael Muir, Adam Melnick, and George Brown. Okay, good. I can see you all. Wonderful. So I want to start off by just asking each of you just to take a minute and tell us what organization you're with and why you decided to join the Ottawa Community Benefits Network, just so we have a sense of orientation to what organization and why you decided to join. And I'm just going to go around the way you appear on my screen. So you are on the upper left, George. How about you kick us off?
Okay, I guess I got involved not with an organization. I'm just sort of a long-time interest in community economic development. Now we call it community wealth building. So I guess I'm one of the co-founders of the LeBreton Flats Coalition, and now also though sit as the new chair of United Way East Ontario, and the United Way is a member of the coalition and very interested in seeing CBAs and social procurement develop in the city.
Thanks, George. Mary?
Hi, my name is Mary Huang. I'm part of Centertown Community Association. I got involved with the LeBreton Flats Community Benefits Coalition about 2 years ago. Actually, just coming up in 2 years now. And I'm now a board member of Centertown Community Association. We also have started an affordable housing working group in CCA. Centertown Community Association, Dalhousie, Hintonburg, Mechanicsville, and more recently Lowertown have signed on as full members. And the Federation of Citizens Association, I think that was the former name, FCA, is also a formal ally. And I also see Marty Carr from Alta Vista Community Association and Chris Greenshield from Vanier Community Association on the call. So it's of great interest to our community association to bring more community lens to new developments in Ottawa.
Thanks, Marion. Over to Adam.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Melnick. I am the program director with the Provincial Building and Construction Trades Council of Ontario. And in respect to the Ottawa Community Benefit Network here, I sit on behalf of the Eastern Ontario, Western Quebec Building Trade Council. So I'm a representative for the building trades locals. I'd like to point out the Ottawa District Labour Council is a proud supporter of the Ottawa Community Benefit Network. Why I am, and I think our organizations are here and representative of that is full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors with the Toronto Community Benefit Network and do lots of work there, and part of, great to see Kumsa leading the charge for us as he always does so eloquently. And also I'm part of all the working groups that April listed off with the Toronto Community Benefit Network. My past life had me as a training director of apprenticeship for a provincial building trade union. So coming with a provincial lens and hopefully trying to build some of that connective tissue from where progress has begun and moved forward in a very, I guess, a leadership fashion from the city of Toronto, and then working with Ottawa to get things off the ground where there's a real desire from the construction building trade community to work with community and to essentially build stronger pathways and bridges. There's a lot of communication out there regarding the skilled trade shortage. As a former board of director member for Build Force Canada, I'm very aware of those numbers, but I think it's important for us to be here representing the building trades and the construction sector to understand where those specific gaps are, and then how do we work with community and how do we facilitate having people from non-traditional pathways enter the skilled trades with the appropriate supports, because there's a lot of disjointed conversation there. So the only way you can be part of that solution is to pull your socks up and join the great work that are being led by everyone here at the Community Benefit Network.
Thanks, Adam. Mary, I noticed, Mary, that you were a Synapse City Boots Camp participant. I didn't know that. That's great. And over to Martin.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Synapse City, for hosting this amazing event. My name is Martin Adelaar. I'm a co-founder of the LeBreton Flats Community Benefits Coalition, which is now the Ottawa Community Benefits Network. And if you look in the chat, you'll see the launch of our revamped website, which is going up today. And I'm also a member of the network steering committee.
Thanks, Martin. And Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone, and my shout out as well to Synapse City for this great event. I'm Michael Murr, the Executive Director with the Center for Social Enterprise Development. We're an Ottawa-based nonprofit, and our whole raison d'etre is to create business activity that truly generates community wealth. So we work with charities, nonprofits, social entrepreneurs, and we also work with purchasers on the demand side. And I think it's a really important that as we go about our day-to-day activities and we purchase, whether as individuals or organizations, that we really think about who we do business with, who we buy from, and recognize that every purchase, as David LePage from Buy Social is fond of saying, every purchase has that impact, whether intended or not. So that is really what we do. And I think it's important that CSED is part of the coalition and the benefits network, because we can be more effective if we work together. So it's important for communities to have a say in terms of the community benefits that accrue from large scale infrastructure projects. And CSED has been delighted to be a member of the network.
Thanks, Michael. I know you've been at this work for a while in Ottawa, and it's sort of cool that you're just launching your website formally this week. I want to get a sense of, I'm almost going to make an assumption, and the assumption is it's the right time for Ottawa to have an Ottawa Community Benefits Network. If that assumption is right, why? What's going on in Ottawa right now that says now's the time to have an Ottawa Community Benefits Network? And I'll open that up to whoever wants to take it. You can just raise your hand.
I never let silence go long, and everyone here knows that. So I think that the time is right for many reasons. I mean, let's be fair. The dialogue around community benefits is continuing to escalate nation, and if not by the entire continent and worldwide for that matter. And when we look at the landscape of Ottawa, I know even from my perspective coming into the region and doing the work related to the building trades, there is such an amazing social and community infrastructure that needed to be connected. There was a great opportunity for the Ottawa Community Benefit Network to come together and set itself to be referred to as maybe a hub in a wheel, where all the spokes can now come together from a central point of operation and stay communicating with each other in their great efforts, find ways to be synergetic and to collaborate, and then to work on larger concentrated outcomes within the community. And then when you look at the development that's happening within the region, it's how, as George has stressed, how to build that community wealth from those investments. These are opportunities, wonderful opportunities that can provide deep, long-standing results in the frame of community wealth in many different outcomes, but they need to be present. So the Community Benefit Network here, I think, has the opportunity to present the great wealth of opportunity of the work being done by all of its partners to those that are performing that work, planning that work, or looking to do better with that work and that development. And so I think the time is absolutely among us. And you know what, it's great to see this work happening.
Great. Does anybody want to add anything to to Adam's comments?
Yes, I just want to add that we've been in existence for 2 years as the LeBreton Flats Community Benefits Coalition. And so what we've expanded our footprint and our mission to cover the developments, public and private, across the city and under the banner of the Ottawa Community Benefits Network. So I think it's important for people to understand that we've been hard at work for 2 years and running. And just to build on what Adam has said, that Ottawa is in the midst of an unprecedented building boom, either currently or in the pipeline, something we may never see again in Ottawa, ever. Billions and billions of dollars will be spent on public and private developments. And if we don't build in community-driven and community-based socioeconomic outcomes, it will be a major lost opportunity. And it will be major lost opportunity in the context of post-COVID building back better. There's been a lot of rhetoric around that. This is a chance to transition from rhetoric to actual community-based outcomes.
Thanks, Martin. Hearing the opportunity, as you expressed this, Martin, that there are billions of dollars around, how would you articulate the goals of the Ottawa Community Benefits Network? What are your, maybe it's a question of priorities or focus. Who would want to take that on?
I'll take that on. Well, I think first and foremost, I first want to acknowledge the Ottawa Community Foundation, which provided us with some small seed funding in our first year of operation and has now provided the network with additional 3-year funding. We're extremely grateful to them. It gives us a solid footprint to carry out our mission. Our goal, first and foremost, is to act as a platform for diverse community voices in the city to have meaningful agency in the development process. That's our number one. We want to work not only with our formal members and allies, but also with other community-based organizations and individual citizens. Our other goals are to realize CBA pilots. As in that old Nike commercial, just do it. We think that we want to get going and pilot aspects of CBAs for this growing cluster of Ottawa projects. Eventually, we would like to see the institutionalization of CBA frameworks and policies, not only at the city level, but also for all 3 levels of government. And we want to acknowledge the leadership of Stephen Willis and Jennifer McCabe in the procurement department in the city, and others who at the city level who are working hard to collaborate with us in this process. And I want to just very quickly identify something that falls under the radar screen. Stephen Willis referred to federal government projects. There's a lot of federal money pouring into the city, not only for LeBreton Flats, but the Canada Lands Company, which is responsible for master planning and selling surplus federal land, has an enormous Ottawa portfolio, real estate portfolio, and they fly under the radar screen. They are on our radar screen. We want to develop a collaborative relationship with them to pilot CBAs. So I think our mission is ambitious, but we're very confident that we'll achieve the goals.
Thanks, Martin. I'm conscious that you just heard, 45 minutes of folks in Toronto, in Vancouver. And I know we all know they've had more experience with CBAs than has Ottawa. And I'm wondering what your reflections are, what you've all taken from hearing the folks in Vancouver and Toronto, and what learnings strike you as relevant or important.
I'll jump in. I mean, number one, there's no substitute for community involvement and having this be a community-driven process. And also at the same time, there's no substitute for, municipal government, especially. Martin made reference to the feds. The feds they get social procurement. They are moving on this. We need the municipal government to also implement whether it's CBA, a policy framework, or social procurement policy framework. We need to work together, but it's got to be driven by the community. Those are two things I heard.
Thanks, George.
I think,
go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sorry. I think from my perspective, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that we have to move across in a number of different areas. So one being formal policy, looking to the City of Ottawa and other levels of government for that leadership. At the same time, though, I think pilots and just moving forward to establish at least a beginning track record in Ottawa of CBA approaches and techniques. If I could share an example of one, and Stephen Willis did mention that the City of Ottawa Public Library and Archives Canada joint facility, we have been very fortunate and very encouraged that the joint project team is very interested in looking at social enterprise as a way of adding some of that additional community value into this development. So if we think about it, when it is open to the public in 2025, landmark facility for Ottawa, 220,000 square feet, 1.7 million visitors a year. What we're talking about is a shared goal to have a social enterprise or enterprises provide food services in that facility. And if you think of what that opportunity would represent in terms of not only meeting the needs of visitors to the facility and those that work there, but being able to have a social enterprise provide that service just unlocks so much additional community value. And so I think it's a really good example of an initiative that we're working towards as we're also looking at that bigger picture in terms of broader policy movement.
Thanks, Michael. Mary, I want to check with you if you have any reflections on what you heard from Toronto and Vancouver.
Well, sorry, first a shout out to Warren Water, who's also another Synapse alumni. He's part of Lower Town Community Association. For example, tonight, there's a meeting with Citizen Hospital. And actually, Vancouver has some CBA pilots with some of the hospitals in the Vancouver area. And that's something we could potentially, we're going to explore ourselves here in Ottawa. Also, in addition to Canada Lands, Martin mentioned, there's and this, the LRT, Steve Willis mentioned, there's a lot of money being poured into Ottawa for infrastructure dollars, for recovery for all, and there could be community benefits to quite a lot of them. And we should try to see if the infrastructure spending and recovery dollar can do double duty and bring more benefits to both the community and people living in Ottawa. I believe Marty Carr was on the call, and they were interested in some exploring something with Herongate, and Manor Park have developer issues. I think it's a little harder to do, as Toronto mentioned, do the Planning Act, but it's not impossible. So Vancouver has better regulation for private developers, but there are ways that we can explore. So there's a lot of opportunities to look into community benefits for Ottawa Community Benefits Network to play a role. And we're going to try to go after some of those.
Ken, Mary just raised a great point, and I just want to acknowledge Herongate. It's been in the news for the last couple years. We all know about it, the demo evictions. Ottawa Acorn needs to be, I think, acknowledged for their leadership in being the first to talk about community benefit agreements in Ottawa, even prior to LeBreton. And they're close, where the Councillor Cloutier and the Ottawa Acorn are close to, I believe, negotiating the first. They're calling it a social contract, but it's basically going to be a community benefit agreement with a major developer. And we're going to know about that in the next month and a half or so. So I think it's important to acknowledge their leadership in this area as well.
Thanks, George.
Sorry, Ken, just really quickly, I want to reflect on the fact that I think, and sharing from the group we've heard, looking at, we often reach out to Toronto and Vancouver. We try to look at for those lived experiences as lessons learned. But I think that, and my history of teaching adults would tell me that learning by doing is one of the best ways we all, progress. And so, quite frankly, I think the time is now for the region to look at implementing. And it's wonderful news, George, to hear that shared, because there's a lot of participants and stakeholders within this spectrum that need to understand and learn how they fit. How does it work? I mean, right now there's a lot of theoretical ideas from the organizations, from the developers, and from the residents of the communities of what a CBA would act like. But in my experience in this province, what you do in one city or municipality does not necessarily happen the same way in another. And so in Ottawa, I think we really need to get a living example moving for us to build and progress from. So call it a pilot, and we like using that term because I think we universally accept it's a learning platform. And so I think where the stage is set, as highlighted, the development is there as well, and the organizations are in place through the network. And I think it's time for us to get moving and learn some lessons.
Thanks.
Ken, I just want to, if you don't mind, suggest that Michael can provide some insight as to who we are in terms of our membership, just for a minute.
Well, yeah, and I think really this is one of the wonderful things about the network. It is now 33 organizations strong. It is comprised of a wide cross-section of organizational types. So if we think of health and social service organizations, Indigenous service organizations, we have organized labor, we have housing associations, environmental groups, social enterprise. So a very diverse membership that collectively represents thousands of people. And I think there's a lot of impact and energy and reach that comes from that.
Thanks, Michael. And this, it sounds to me like, Michael, what you were just talking about is, Martin, you articulated this very first goal that you articulated was to act as a platform for diverse community voices to have meaningful agency in the development process. And I'm assuming those 33 groups, whatever, are part of the community voices that you want to have meaningful agency. I am curious a bit to hear what meaningful agency looks like. If you have some sense of, so what are we talking about when we talk about community groups having meaningful agency in the development process? Is there anything you would articulate about what that looks like? How do we know when we have it?
Well, I think you've seen from the evidence from Toronto and Vancouver, and I just want to point out that internationally, the CBA movement is growing. It started in the United States. There are CBAs in place in several US cities. Scotland has CBA policy. So the definition of meaningful agency varies from project to project, community to community. But it starts with a recognition by the institutions and the developers and the large general contractors that community voices not only need to be heard, but need to be part of a formal collaboration. The roadmaps, the tools, the structures of how to develop CBAs are out there and can be customized to our circumstances here in Ottawa. But it has to be more than presence. And so I think that we want to be a platform for that to happen, and we'll continue to reach out to more community organizations and citizens. And I just want to build on what Michael's identified, that we have two important Indigenous organizations in our network. And these are organizations that represent the Aboriginal citizens of Ottawa. And the Aboriginal citizens of Ottawa often get overlooked in the nation-to-nation consultations that exist, that necessarily exist, because we live and operate here on unceded land. But we want to provide time and space to give voice to the citizens here in Ottawa who are among the Aboriginal communities.
Thank you, Martin. If people who are watching want to get involved or want to understand what your next steps are, how would they get involved? What are your next steps? What might that look like for folks?
Well, Kevin Holmes from the Social Innovation Lab at Algonquin, one of our members, who actually, he and his team are responsible for our new website. If you go to the chat group, ottawacommunitybenefits.ca, ottawacommunitybenefits.ca, and you can provide your contact information, your interests, ask us questions. If you want to get involved, we would very much welcome that. We need all hands on deck, especially in the midst of this enormous Ottawa construction boom. And I just want to finish off. The final comment is that system change and democracy is messy. CBAs are the most democratic and accountable tool to achieve socioeconomic outcomes. But don't expect it to be perfect. And as my friend George Brown will say, never let perfect get in the way of good. So I've been looking at the many brilliant questions coming in, and I think we'll get back to everyone, but we want to leave the message that it's not a perfect process. There'll be tweaking and changing along the way. Democracy is messy. That's just the way it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. It also goes back. I liked, Michael, when you said this is a marathon, not a sprint. And hearing you each talk and looking at you, I get a sense that you're here for the marathon. So congratulations to all of you for starting up the Ottawa Community Benefits Network. We will, by the way, as Martin mentioned, we are going to try to get back to you with many questions have come up. We are going to try to circle back at the end in a document. Synapsity will be connecting with the Ottawa Community Benefits Network, and we'll see if we can get out some answers to Synapsity folks through our newsletter, because we know there have been lots of questions. I really want to thank all of you for showing up, our guests from Vancouver and Toronto, the folks from the Ottawa Community Benefits Network, all the participants who were there and exchanging with one another and asking some really significant questions. And I'll turn it over to Nick to close this.
Yes, well, not much more to say. Thank you again to all of our speakers. I'm going to slowly unpin them from our window here. If you liked what you saw today, I did put the donation link for Synapsity in the chat. You go to the Social Planning Council of Ottawa's page and then select Synapsity from the drop-down menu. As well, we are looking to speak to anyone who wants to make the city better. So whether it's about community benefits, whether it's about something that you're passionate about in the city, or if you're just looking to find out about more, please reach out to myself at nick@synapsity.ca, to our full team at hello@synapsity.ca. And if you aren't already, please sign up for our newsletter, which you can see at our website, synapsity.ca.
Nick, one other thing to mention is that this recording will be posted at some point to YouTube, right? So folks,
It
if you have
is-
friends who weren't able to attend, but who you think would like seeing this, that it will eventually be posted to YouTube, and you can let other folks who missed it watch it.
Absolutely. It was a live recording, live streamed to YouTube. So you can go and watch it again right now if you want to. So I posted the link. Oh, and Mary Huang just reposted it. So please share it with your friends and spread the word.
Thanks all.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll end the recording now.